Okay, so we started out, we created a folder on our web drive that contains a blank web page and the first 3 images we're going to add to the gallery. Once we get the gallery built up, it will be very easy to add more images later. But we're going to create the basic outline. And then we drew up a simple template for how we want the page to look. We're going to have 3 main sections, a nav section, which can have links to other places or back to our homepage, a thumbnail section where we're going to create small versions of these images, and then a main display where we'll place the currently selected main image. Now we can go into our web page and we can create divs to display these. So again, we have a nav div that can contain the code for that. And then we'll create a thumbnail div and a main div. And we want to give every element we create a unique ID because that allows us to grab hold of that element in JavaScript and modify its contents. Now, in order to outline these divs, in order to make it clear what's going on, I'm going to give each of them a color, and we'll modify this later. But for now, I want to say we're going to have our nav section have a unique style on it. And for example, our background color for nav could be navy. And we can do the same for the others. And this lets us see what these look like. So we can sort of then work on the style to give each of these sections the right size and shape and positioning that we want. And so then we're going to have a thumbs. And I'm going to give this one a different background color. I'm going to use cornflower blue for this one. And then we have main. And just for funsies, we'll go with gold. Graceland colors, right? And so now, if I open up this page, it didn't work. Why didn't it work? Did I miss something? Did I misspell my colors or? Those exist. This works fine. Okay. I know what happens. So because my divs didn't have anything in them, they didn't show up. But by adding some text to those divs, they appear. And you can see that right now they aren't really the right size or shape that we're looking for. So now let's add some styles to give these what we want. So I'm going to add a width on my nav div of 100% because I want that to fill the page. And then on my thumbs div, I'm going to add a width of, let's say, 39%. And on my main, a width of 60%. And so now, if we look at these, we see that they are the correct width. And even that 39 and 60 seems a little big. So I'm actually going to shift it to 3070 or 2970. Now you can do it with the full width, and in many cases you'll want to. I find it's better to leave 1% of the screen as padding because it helps make the floating a little easier. And now we can add those floats to our thumbs and main in order to put them in the right position. So I'm going to float my thumbs div to the left and my main div to the right. And so, there's something up there. Something. And so now we can see we have our nav div above, and then our thumbs to the left, and our main to the right. And they're still only a single line wide, which means we need to modify them. So let's add some height to them. And we'll make our nav, say, 100 pixels. Seems like a good height. And let's have our thumbs be just 100%. The other two be 100% of what's left. So we'll actually take that. Paste that there. Okay. And so we can see that we're starting to get some behaviors here, but the 100% isn't really what we're going for. So let's try changing that to just a hard-coded value, say 700 pixels. Now, one of the advanced techniques we'll talk about here in a few weeks, or sometime next week, most likely, is how can we measure the size of the screen? So in this case, we have our nav be 100 and these others be 700. That assumes a screen height of 800 pixels, which I happen to know is about average for a screen of this size. But if you're working on a mobile device or a 7-inch tablet versus a 10-inch tablet, you're going to see a lot of variations in that. So one way to deal with that is to actually measure that using JavaScript and then inject whatever value so you can get 70% of 7 inches or 70% of 10 inches or whatever you need. Was there a question?
I think you need to show it so you can look at what and see what you're doing. Maybe may not be using the last one.
I mean, any template should work. Okay, so you're in gallery, capital L, and gallery lab.
But that's not us.
So So refresh the page. F12 and refresh the page. So that. Refresh the page. Do that again. And that very last link. The link to the page. So what's going on is we have doing something called caching. This is a variable. That's one out of control. And now, what caching does is once it downloads a copy of the page, I didn't notice the issue was that once it downloads a copy of the page, it doesn't re-download it even if it changes because it doesn't have to change. For some reason it's wrong. So use this capital L. Okay, so you found a page at least. Yeah, I'm not sure why. So what's happening is that Chrome isn't refreshing that link. So what you have saved and what's showing in Chrome are different copies. What you're looking at in Chrome is an old copy of that index page. For whatever reason, it's not updating, and I'm not sure why. Or maybe you didn't save it. I'm not sure. Maybe it's just not a save change. Wrong page. The index is the one that wasn't updated. Because it's that link that was not changing. So if you go back and click the link again, See, it's still taking you to lowercase l. So what's going on with you? Add content into your divs, put some text in your divs. So right now there's just nothing in them.
Right.
So they have no presence.
Okay.
So
Right there.
yeah, just put the letter A. Whatever it doesn't matter, just something. And then the last one is full effect. Okay, then you need to enter your password. It's not uploaded. But when is it? You sure? Wait and see. Open up Notepad. Press Control A. Control C. Just in case. Make a change and just add a space or something. No. So go back. Go back. Wait a second. Let's skip. Close the file. Now go back to when I CPU and open it. And I'll press Control A. Control V. Now. Anybody else not need a second? Okay. I'll come around. Hope you guys stay all caught up.
I just need the coding for the
Oh, yeah.
spacing.
I'll pull up the code.
So the video is going to be on Google Drive.
I'll post a link to YouTube. It'll be on YouTube. So we've got, we need to add something. So just type the letter A in each of those divs. Within the divs. Yeah. Just something to help you. And missing some of those ones in your CSS as well. Everybody else doing good? All right. Do not hesitate to ask. I am happy to help. So now that we have our basic layout set up, we've created 3 divs and we've given them the basic positioning that we want, we can start adding content to them. So one of these, our nav div, we're going to have a link. So let's just go ahead and create a link back to our index page, right? So that'll be a href equals and then back to your index page. For me, that's 2 directories up. Gallery lab examples. And then index.html. Now yours may be only 1 directory up. That depends on the structure you've done. Remember, the // moves you up 1 folder. So if we look at where I've created this folder, it's within the folder Gallery Lab. Moving up 1 folder puts me in examples. Up 1 more folder puts me in public HTML. So because I have to go up 2 folders, I need 2 sets of the symbol for moving up, which is that double period. And so I'll just add that real quick and then put a closing tag in there and say back to home. Oh. And we can see that that link now shows up there. Now inside our main, we're going to want to create an image, right? because we're going to want to display an image in the main. Now, here's where we're going to want to start really assigning these IDs. We're going to want to give some ID to this so that when we get to writing script here in a minute, we can assign a picture to go there. And so we're going to say ID equals, and I'll just call this main picture. And then I'm going to set an SRC, but I'm actually going to have it be blank. And this is because we don't know what picture we want to go there yet. So I'm not going to create an SRC. So I've created this image. It exists in this area, but it doesn't have a picture to it yet. And so if we refresh that, we'll see that it doesn't show up. And that's because there's no source there. There's no picture being loaded yet. Normally we put a file name in there. SRC. But because we haven't specified that yet, it's going to stay blank. And the last piece of content I want to create is a simple image in our thumbnail. And this one I'll call pick one. And I'll call that one, I think I had a polar bear.jpg, right? So that's one of my pictures. And so that should now show up over there. Now that's super zoomed in, it's super big, but that's okay for now. We'll get to adding some styling later. So I've now gone and added some basic content to these divs. So these are the 3 divs we created before. And you can see that I have gone through and added just a little bit of information within them. And I'll flesh these out a bit so you guys can see them. So I've created inside my nav a link. So there's something in the nav that we want to be there. In my thumbnail, I've created the first image that I want to add. We can see that it's way too big, but it's there. And in the main section, I've created an image, a blank image with no source to it. And now we're going to use JavaScript in order to modify this. And the process by which we're going to do this is the process we've been talking about. We're going to start by defining a function that does what we want to do. We'll write the code for taking the source from the picture we're clicking on and assigning that source to the main picture. That's the action we want to take, is take whatever our source is for these thumbnails and place that as the source of this main picture. Once we have that function created, we're going to bind it to a click event on those thumbnails so that when you click on the thumbnail, it becomes the picture we're looking at. So our next step is to create a script and to write this function. So we need to give this function a name, and we'll say, what should we call this? We should give it a meaningful name. We want to move the picture from the thumbnail to the main. We could call it display image. That's a nice shorthand way of saying that, so let's do that. So we're going to call this display image. And to create a function, we say that variable is equal to a function, and then a set of parentheses, and then a set of curly brackets.
I'm assuming you're not trying to do this the way we did in class.
I'm not using jQuery. Now, what is the command to get a hold of an element? We talked about it earlier. The one thing you guys really need to remember. You guys have used it on every lab for the last month. Sorry? What is the command to get a hold of an element on a web page in JavaScript? Get element. Get element by ID. Document.getElementById. Now, what element do we want to get a hold of? What is the source of this change?
Function.
We're working on writing the function, and this function needs to take the src from our thumbnail and add it to our main. So which element do we need to grab first? We're going to be working with both elements.
The ID name.
The ID name. So we need to get the ID from which element. Which one of these IDs do we want to grab first?
Pick one.
Pick one. Now, once we grab this, we're going to want to hold on to it. So we'll create a new variable and we'll just call this source picture. We can call these whatever we want. They just have to start with a letter. That's the only requirement. So we'll call this source picture. And let's go ahead and actually set up a variable for our destination as well. So we'll have a destination picture. And that'll work the same way. We'll use document.getElementById, except for that, we're going to use main picture. That's the one we're going to grab a hold of. Now the action we need to do is to get the src attribute from our source picture and set the src attribute on our destination picture. So let's create another variable to store that, and we'll call this one source file, for example. And let's set that equal to source picture dot get attribute. Source picture dot get attribute. And then we're going to get a hold of the src attribute. Now what this does, what this code does as we walk through it, is it starts out by saying which element is pick one. Grab a hold of that element and store that in source picture. So now we have source picture, which represents this element, this image tag. We're going to do the same thing for main picture. So we're going to get a hold of main picture and store that, this image element, in our destination picture variable. So now we have names for both of those image tags. Then we're going to go to our source picture, go to this element, and say get attribute src. So now we're going to look at this image tag and say what's the src attribute. In this case it's polarbear.jpg, and we're going to store that inside the new variable source file. And now we can do the action of our function, which is to say destination picture dot set attribute src, because we're changing the source, and we're going to use source file. And so now we go to what we have destination picture, which is again this main picture, and we're going to set the src attribute to be whatever we have stored in source file, which is in this case polarbear.jpg. And so now if we go out and we run this, nothing happens. We've written our function, but we haven't found a way to bind this function. That's the second step, is we now need to bind this function to that element. And we have a couple of ways we could do this. We could say onClick equals display image. You can go up and modify the image tag itself. And then if we click, it triggers the event.
Click on image.
On click equals display image, and you need to include the parents. So that's one way to do it, but that kind of messes with the formatting of our page, and it's not really neat. So I'm actually going to do show you guys a second way. Since we have that source picture, since we already have a hold of that, we can then say source picture equals, or source picture dot on click equals display image. And we're actually going to need to move that outside of our function. And that way we can get rid of this up there. So our script now has 6 lines of code in it. Let me clean it up just a bit for you guys there. And just test it real quick so you guys aren't... That didn't work. What did I do wrong? So I've made a mistake. You can't use source picture out there, but we can copy this down there. So now we can set that on click for pick 1 to be display image. That should work. This still isn't quite what I want it to be. Now the last thing I want to do today, and we'll pick this up on Wednesday and talk about how we can add some more images and create some more behaviors. The last thing I want to do today is sort of lock down some of the styling. If you look at my image in particular, these are really big pictures. They don't really look right. And that's simply some styling. So let's go ahead and add a little bit of styling to these. Again, I'll post this video for you guys. But I'm going to go ahead and say for pick 1, I'm going to create a maximum size. And so I'll do a width of, we'll call this one 200 pixels, and a height of 100 pixels. Pick 1. And then for main, we'll create some styling as well that has a width of, say, 500 pixels and a height of 400 pixels. And now, oops, that's not quite right. That's still, oh, main picture, not main. That's why. And that's much more reasonable. It's still not great, but now they're fitting within their different blocks, which is something. And we can add some more styling to this. We could say that we're going to have margins of 50 pixels, for example, on all sides, so that it's not pushed up into the corner like that. And we can do some other things. At that point, though, you're into CSS styling, which you guys should be well practiced in. And hopefully you're starting to see how we can take this and we can add more and more advanced and more complex behaviors to create more and more interesting and dynamic websites. We'll pick this up on Wednesday. So just a reminder, go ahead and take a look at your homework, see if you can work through some of those examples. They're going to revolve around this idea of doing what's called manipulating the DOM, or manipulating the document that we're creating with HTML using getElementById, getInSetAttributes, and inner HTML to create new tags. And that's all I have for you guys today.